Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Big rumours today emerging that you'll be very happy to hear if you're a Red Bull or Max Verstappen fan, but if you're a fan of good racing and competition in Formula 1 for this season and the seasons to come, this is pretty incredible and probably rather terrible news in some respects. Helmut Marko from Red Bull says that Max Verstappen was driving well within his limits in the Hungarian Grand Prix when he won by 35 seconds, the largest margin in almost approaching 2 years. He had apparently way more in the tank, and you've got to wonder what these winning margins could be if Max was really putting pedal to the metal. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, wanted to notice this, that Formula 1 are bringing all the 10 teams, drivers and liveries to the Formula 1 Academy. So this is effectively the follow-on to the W Series. It's the women's kind of a series, the F1 Academy. And it's pretty cool to see that they've got all 10 teams involved in the liveries and everything for next season's edition. But let's talk Helmut Marko, because he mentioned Daniel Ricciardo, said that Daniel made a perfect debut, also said that if it wasn't for the first lap incident with getting, Zhou Guanyu drove into the back of him, apparently he also got a small bit of damage from that as well, which makes his recovery drive all the more impressive. But yeah, so he says absolutely right to sign him. He brings a positive vibe and energy and is making a very compelling case already that Sergio Perez's seat should be under threat next year. He also gave a comment on the porcelain trophy that Lando Norris broke, but so it was Norris's fault, but Max Verstappen maybe didn't seem to bother him too much, and maybe that's fair enough. But actually, Helmut Marko says the Hungarians are famous for their love of valuable porcelain. Even when we were there were beautiful bowls and vases. The copy of the trophy will come to our factory, and I will teach Max to appreciate the original that he is getting replaced. That's the Hungarian tradition. The young people have to understand that first. Thought that was quite nice of Marko, but obviously he does also go on to comment on how dominant Max is and will continue to be. This was a scary statement when he says that, as is usually the case, when teams bring upgrades to their car, they don't fully know immediately how to maximize the potential of them. This was the case when Red Bull brought their upgrades in Baku. They were good in Baku. They won by a long way, but they said that they hadn't really fully exploited everything there was to be gained from them in terms of setup and just other ideas around the car. And apparently it's the same story again. They brought a significant upgrade to Hungary and, it was worth 0.2 of a second, at least from their perspective. Sam Collins said that it's probably worth even more than that. And they say, Red Bull, that there's a lot more to come from this current car that they have, even than they showed this weekend, which is no doubt a scary sign. In addition to this comment, and this is the big one, Max could actually have driven even faster. He wasn't driving at the limit by a long shot. This is coming from Helmut Marko. This guy, pretty much says it how it is. And it's funny, really, because Red Bull have said at the start of the season, they were saying, oh no, we are pushing the limits. You can see Max and Checo, they're fighting at all this. Like, that's what the car has in the tank. And I think it's only been a couple of times where Max has really pushed it to the limit. I mean, Miami was a bit of a statement drive, right? And ever since then, it's been, pretty clear the way the season is going to go. And there have been other people saying, like, well, back when Hamilton was winning everything, Red Bull used to say, oh, it's just, the car and everything. The Mercedes is so good, that's why Hamilton's winning. But now Red Bull are basically saying, like, yeah, it pretty much is the car, because Max isn't even trying here, and we're still winning by half a minute. And let's not forget, this winning margin over Lando Norris is one of the biggest margins we have seen in years, and one of the biggest margins since the turn of the millennium for victory for a driver that wasn't even pushing the limits, apparently. I just wonder how much more he's got in the tank. So let's have a look at that. Toto Wolff made it clear as well that it's a Formula 1 car versus a bunch of Formula 2 cars. That's like his perspective, and the numbers aren't too far away. At least it's Formula Max versus the rest. Now, Perez was stuck in a fair bit of traffic, but even in clean air didn't have the pace that Max did. But, I think Adrian Newey has even recognised that he's incredible at building a fast car. He's not necessarily the best at building a car, and his team aren't necessarily the best at building a car that suits multiple driving styles, but in the hands of Max, it's very fast and apparently could be even faster. This is courtesy of F1pace.com, and look at the numbers. So Max was averaging a 1:23.4 4. Checo was the second fastest car, roughly 5 tenths behind. Then Hamilton, technically the third fastest, basically because of that great final stint where he was actually really quick. And I think Mercedes explained that in a video they released today, that the reason why Hamilton was slow in the first stint was because both Hamilton and Russell had to do a lot of lift and coast. They'd underestimated how much cooling would be required, and they just had to drive slow to maintain, to deal with the temperatures, which probably cost Hamilton a podium, all things considered. So he was third fastest, then Norris, then Leclerc, then Russell, Piastri, because he got a bit of damage, I think, going off track at one point in the final stint of the race. But look at the gap, right? Max is 5 tenths up on Hamilton, technically the second fastest non-Red Bull car, and yet he apparently has way more in the tank. And you can see that looking at the fastest lap. Verstappen's fastest lap was a 1:20.6 or so. Hamilton's fastest lap that he did, a 1:21.6, a second slower. And I'm not saying that Hamilton was necessarily pushing on this lap to try and get the fastest lap, but back in Spain, we saw that on average, Hamilton and Verstappen had a 3 tenths of a second difference between them in pace, and also their fastest lap attempt in Spain was exactly 3 tenths apart. So that gives you a pretty good indication of the relative strength of the cars at that weekend. But this weekend, and also this was a track that apparently Red Bull was somewhat concerned they wouldn't be so good at, and they've just dominated it in just so emphatically. These are the winning margins so far this season. This is Max Verstappen's winning margins, largely over Perez at a few of these, but some of the larger gaps are over other rivals, and the most recent one, 34 seconds back to Lando Norris, is just absurd, and it falls in as I believe 13th, is it, pretty much, on the list of biggest winning margins this millennium. The biggest one is Hamilton 2008 at Silverstone in wet conditions, like an simply unbelievable drive, 68 seconds clear, and pretty much lapped everyone up to like almost second or third place. It was absolutely insane, obviously pre-Mercedes days. Then you've got Montoya, 2021 Sochi Hamilton as well, in that ridiculous race, the Norris, Inters, like stay out, no, all this stuff. And Verstappen got P2 that day, right, because of a great strategy call by Red Bull. Plenty of entries here from the Schumachers. Then you've got Raikkonen, Rosberg 2016 in China, then Verstappen in 2021, the Styrian Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher again, Raikkonen, and now Verstappen's entry comes in at, what is it, 13th pretty much, yeah, at the Hungarian Grand Prix 2023. But how much bigger could this gap have been if Verstappen was really pushing? Because when the car's so good and the driver's so good in the car, Verstappen doesn't need to push, right? And it's probably been the same for a few of these drives we see on the list. But there's no risk in pushing the tyres, just in case there's a safety car or something. You might run into issues if you did. Pushing the engine components, might as well preserve the engine as much as possible, keep it cool, do a nice bit of lift and coast, just drive around the track like you're having a nice Sunday drive, and still win by 34 odd seconds. So what does Helmut Marko mean by not driving to the limit by a long shot? Is that, a tenth a lap? Is that 3 tenths a lap? Like, what do you guys perceive that to be? Because if he's 5 tenths faster than anybody else anyway, and there's more in the tank, like, it's a bit concerning for the rest of not just this year, because this season is going to be a historic Formula 1 season, for good or for ill, right? It's going to go down in history. The amount of wins Red Bull are going to have, the amount of wins they already have, the amount of points that Verstappen's going to put on the board, like, it's going to go down in history this season. But what we kind of want to see is next year and the year beyond that, going into the new regulations in 2026, whether there's actually going to be any competition. Because Verstappen perceivably could win 80% of races from now until 2026. Like, it's not absolutely out of the question that happens, given what we are currently seeing. His rolling win rate in the last 50 races is, I think, the highest of any driver ever. And there's still plenty of Hamilton wins among there that he's probably going to overtake. So it's not just the car. Max Verstappen deserves a lot of credit, but in large part, it's the car. And that's what Mercedes know. That's what even Red Bull know. And now they're even admitting it. As Helmut Marko says, that Max, wasn't even really pushing that hard, and yet the car is still doing what it is doing right now. So, and Toto Wolff is like, look, it's a meritocracy. When we were first and second every race, it wasn't good for entertainment either. But at least there used to be, like, Mercedes, yes, in the early days, they used to turn their engine down, and you used to get Hamilton and Rosberg going at it for the win, which would be arguably more entertaining than what we currently have. But still, in both circumstances, back then they were turning their engine down to kind of show that they weren't as good as they really were. And that's what Mercedes were doing to sandbag. And Red Bull are kind of doing the same thing today, but Max just isn't driving at the limit. So it's a similar story, but it's a less entertaining outcome, shall we say, than back in the Mercedes dominant days, especially 2014 to 2016. And to even go one step further, there's been some analysis done on the upgrade that says that this is only just the beginning, and the upgrade was not just intended to beat the competitors, but to destroy them. It wasn't an update, it was a revolution. This letterbox inlet they've now got on the side pod design, and apparently this is working really well because they can get away with less cooling. The Honda engine, apparently it operates better at those temperatures than the other engines do, so they can get away with it, and this is apparently like a precursor, a trailer to next year's RB20, which pretty much all of the efforts of Red Bull are now focusing on next year's car. And given this car is so good, it's like, is this ever going to end? I think is what people are wondering at the moment. Because as I say, there's only been a couple of times, I think, where we've seen Max really push it at circuits like Miami. And when he has done, the level of performance discrepancy is just absurd. And what might we see in Spa? A great circuit for Max, a great circuit for the Red Bull. Like, he had an unbelievably dominant victory there last year in the RB18. And that wasn't even the same beast as the RB19 is. And Max has got every single point from every single Grand Prix for the last 3 rounds. Fastest laps, sprint wins, the lot. He's cleaned out completely. So, you wouldn't bet against him continuing it again. And Mercedes is sitting there thinking, well, we've got to make sure we don't leave any stone unturned, focus 100% on where we can find the gains. But even if Mercedes don't fully understand where they're going, that's a bit of a concern to actually try and catch Red Bull. George Russell does say, though, on a positive note, that they would be, with the exception of McLaren, quite happy with how it's gone, because Russell has kind of, Mercedes have pretty much overtaken Ferrari and Aston from where they were at the start of the season. But McLaren's jump up to second fastest is making them, if it wasn't for McLaren, we'd be very, very satisfied with the progress we're making, moving ahead of the midfield, putting a gap on our rivals, closing on Red Bull, which is, do they actually close on Red Bull? That's a debate. But I think the jump of McLaren can actually be a positive, because it shows a development direction that can yield massive returns, and I'm sure that Mercedes and others will be looking at that and how they can kind of align that with their own concept. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave it for today. Very much interested to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. And just to close out with this, which is the current weather forecast for the circuit of Spa-Francorchamps, which looks like this. Raining, as it is a lot of Northern Europe right now, every single day, but especially Friday's meant to be wet, a large part of it. Saturday is very wet, is kind of the current understanding, and also potentially some thunderstorms in the air. And then Sunday looks like this, with likely rain around the Grand Prix time. So every day's meant to be wet. I don't know what it means, but it's Spa, so we've seen it before. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.